Nature. It is all around us. Trees, flowers, water, volcanoes, animals.
What would we do without nature?
I don't know, Emily. However, I know for sure that humans are extremely dependent on nature. We rely on Earth's freshwater sources and ozone layer to protect us from harmful sun rays, just to name a few.
Is this why it is important to make sure that climate change is kept to a minimum?
It sure is. Climate change is when the weather at any region on Earth is unusual for a relatively long period of time. Today, the rate of change is faster than ever, causing huge changes to the environment, affecting all things dependent on nature. This rapid change is in part to human activities that started during the period of industrialization, when burning of carbon-based fuels were introduced as a source for heat and energy.
Human-caused climate change can be minimalized, but only if more educational programs on the causes of climate change are made. Such educational programs could include mandatory environmental action programs implemented in school systems and increase in special segments on the dangerous effects of climate change on major news channels.
From a Seattle Times article written by Mike Stevens, the state director for the Nature Conservancy, and Brenna Davis, the chair of Washington Business for Climate Action, it states 80% of Washington state people believe in climate change. Therefore, there is still 20% who don't believe it. How can we make this 20% of people believe, Emily?
Well, Shauna, we can create programs to educate the everyday person about climate change. This is also the aim of this video.
After all, when the public is informed about climate change, they can invest their money in eco-friendly alternatives, as well as vote for changes in state government to do the same. Using carbon fuels are cheap options right now in our world. However, carbon fuels release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, causing the planet to warm due to a greenhouse effect it creates. As more carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere, the better the Earth gets at trapping its heat and not letting it go out to outer space.
The government can play a big part in helping prevent human-caused climate change. One example is a cap in trade, when the government can impose a limit to how much pollutant a company can produce and tax them if they go over the set limit. When the government financially encourages companies to pay attention to the pollution of energy, water, and waste supply of their own buildings, companies are then more willing to adapt to greener technologies.
If we don't focus in lessening the impacts of climate change, then our environment, including people, will suffer from the consequences climate change brings.
There are countless indicators to these environmental consequences. However, some of the main indicators of climate change, besides increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in Washington state, include increases in surface temperature, ocean acidification, extreme weather, and melting glaciers. All these indicators interact with each other to create the effect of climate change in Washington state, affecting both human and plant life. The Washington community needs to look at the ramifications of climate change in the environment as not just effects on where they live, but see how these effects will also affect themselves.
First, we are going to argue about how temperature changes influence climate change. Despite being the main and obvious influence of climate change, an increase in temperature is interrelated with every other indicator of climate change. The first step to minimizing climate change is for people to understand the connections of how human activities affect climate.
What do you think of when you think of the word temperature?
I don't know about you, but I think of how hot or cold something is. I also associate it with weather.
Me too. When the weather gets really hot or really cold for a long period of time, and it's unusual for the region, is usually an indication of climate change.
Today, we are currently experiencing temperatures getting warmer. Harry Swanson, a professor at the Earth and Space Science Department here at UW, told us about his personal experience with temperature increasement at his hometown in Canada.
Directly, of course, would be just being old enough where I've actually seen the effects of it back home in Canada where I grew up. As a child, the lake, the Okanagan Lake where I grew up, it used to freeze over every 15 to 20 years, and that hasn't happened since probably the 1970s.
I think this personal experience of how the lake has not been frozen for over 40 years definitely shows the correlation of gradual increasing temperatures.
Here in Washington, the temperature will rise to be almost 2 degrees higher by 2020, according to the Washington State Department of Ecology. This may seem like a small change, but the small change of 2 degrees means that our weather patterns will also change.
These changing patterns will lead to milder winters and hotter summers. This will affect Washington water supplies, change the growing times of crops, alter tree growth, lead to a decline in salmon population, and even create human health risks. This is why it is important to implement educational programs and to vote in increased state government involvement, as risking human health is detrimental to our existence.
Unfortunately, due to the warmer temperatures, there will also be more rain and less snow over the coming years.
This decrease in snow is unfortunate because it directly affects the glaciers in Washington state, as there will not be enough snow to support our glaciers as snow turns into water.
With this in mind, glaciers are literally masses of ice formed over thousands of years that can be found in Washington mountains. The problem is that they are melting much quicker than normal as surface temperature gradually increases.
For example, 7 of Mount Baker's glaciers have disappeared. Maury Pelto, glaciologist of Nichols College, predicts that at this rate, the rest of the glaciers will not last more than 50 years.
The importance of glaciers is that many of the rivers here in Washington are snow-fed, meaning that if there is less snow, then there will be less fresh water available.
This change in glaciers affects how much water is in a stream at a certain time, and as humans, we rely on these rivers to survive.
Some things you might not think about when you think of rivers is agriculture, hydropower, and fish population, all of which are affected by this melting of Washington's glaciers.
The effects from the warmer temperature also means that the snow that does fall in the winter will melt faster in the spring, when the need for water is not as drastic as during the summertime.
When summer comes and there is not enough water, the result is a drought.
According to Washington State Department of Ecology, Washington has been facing recurring droughts in the past summers, leaving behind withered and abandoned crops, dead fish, record low rivers, and declining groundwater levels.
Also, according to this department, these droughts are costly. The reduced water cost the Washington farmers an estimated $140 to $195 million in crops.
Farmers are not the only ones affected. Washington State Department of Ecology also predicts that by 2050 there will be a 20 to 40% reduction in water availability.
To combat this cutback in water, Washington will have to adapt. One potential solution is more reservoir storage, but this is expensive. The proposed Black Rock Reservoir would cost $3.5 to $4 billion.
There is also all the forest fires to consider that result from these droughts.
Not only are these fires damaging to all the houses that they burn, they will also create air pollution, habitat loss, and will cost about 50% more to fight against them than what is spent already, which in 2020 will be about $75 million per year.
However, droughts are not the only thing plaguing Washington.
The change in temperature will also increase Washington's other instances of extreme weather. These incidents of extreme weather will include windstorms, heat waves, storms with extreme rain or snow, and dust storms in Washington state.
Droughts and extreme rain and snow also affect natural bodies of water.
This causes huge problems, especially in Washington where a lot of the state's economy is dependent on water.
To prove this, take the shellfish farm called Taylor Shellfish, located in Shelton, Washington, for example. Terry Klinger, a part of the School of Marine and Environmental Affairs here at University of Washington, first defines what ocean acidification is.
Ocean acidification is it's a change in seawater chemistry that makes it less friendly to many organisms.
Sylvia Hayes, the First Lady of Oregon, continues describing how this acidification affects this shellfish and, as a result, Taylor Shellfish Farm.
We already have acidity levels that are high enough at times that they are dissolving the shells of things like mussel and oyster larvae.
This dissolving occurs for shellfish shells are made out of calcium carbonate, a chemical compound that reacts with acid. Marco Pinchot of Taylor Shellfish further concludes how this liquidation affects the environment.
When you see failures of calcium carbonate shelled organisms, that's an indication that the whole rest of the base of the food chain is also in danger.
It goes on to mention that people are losing their jobs over the ocean acidification since these fishermen can't sell these oysters to places such as restaurants and other commercial businesses.
That is such a shame. However, what causes the ocean to be so acidic? Professor Swanson explains how the acidification occurs.
You clearly can see the effect of the addition of CO2, the acidification of oceans. You're seeing more bleaching incidences of coral reefs as you're putting more dissolved CO2 into the oceans.
It does not only affect shelled organisms, but coral reefs too. Both are composed of calcium carbonate.
As you can see, the increase of CO2 is causing indicators such as the destruction of shellfish shells and chloride bleaching to arise.
We are now going to tie all these indicators back to the effect of how educational programs and government action can have to maintain climate change to a minimum.
For educational programs, those can arise from state funding, government funding, even though that seems unlikely during our time today, or even from college student enthusiasts like us who have looked at a lot of scholars and popular sources and synthesized all of the collected information together.
If the government chooses to act, such things can be made as imposing taxes on companies such as tobacco and oil, where their products and process of obtaining them causes a lot of harm to the environment.
As far as in the technologies, like fracking, for instance, is now opened up a whole bunch of new, get natural gas and other fossil fuel reserves that weren't there, say, 20 years ago. It really come down to governments, making those kind of incentives or directing, or either through carbon caps or taxes and so forth on carbon-based technologies.
Government involvement is more important now than ever. However, state actions could suffice. Things that we can do is to vote on state legislature in order to allow states to impose taxes on air-polluting companies and businesses for their carbon usage. Or we could stop investing in such companies. When someone refers to climate change, they are often not talking about just the weather. Yes, climate change is damaging our environment, yet these changes do not stop there. Climate change also affects humans, us. Think about this example.
If you think about mountains, right, and topography, you have less land mass as you go higher and higher in topography. And so if you cause the snow level to rise 1,000 feet, you have that much less water storage. And we're very dependent on our snowpack for our water storage. And we don't have big reservoirs like California, where you can store large supplies of water for use in the summertime here.
We need water in order to live. The reason why climate change is so important to discuss is because of its effect on each and every person.
That's right, it affects everyone. It may affect some more than others, but there is no denying that it doesn't affect anyone.
When scientists try to think of ways to minimize human-caused climate change, they are also doing so to protect their own race, not just for the planet.
This is because the planet will continue without humans. What we need to protect is the environment which allows us to continue to live on this planet and other living organisms.
Professor Swanson will do us the honor of concluding why it is important to minimize climate change.
I think they're equally endangered if you think of the Earth as a system. Clearly, our ecology is intrinsically linked to the ecology of the plants and animals around us. You have a failure of one system, either phytoplankton or clearly vegetation zones being moved, or where we can no longer sustain certain types of agriculture. It's all interrelated. It's all linked. The Earth is going to be fine whether we're here or not. So we can fry ourselves to death or nuke ourselves or poison ourselves, but the Earth will very quickly recover. There'll be new species, so it's not really save the Earth, it's save the humans and the ecological systems that we're intrinsically linked with is what we should be looking about saving.